Good day, and thank you for watching my presentation. I'm really eager to share insights from my Classroom Impact project, which focuses on implementing developmental rubrics and explicit teaching strategies within a Year 12 class at Cambalda West District High School. This intervention targeted specific challenges facing my students, such as low engagement, inconsistent attendance driven by mixed learning demands, including work placement, TAFE, and apprenticeship pathways, and substantial learning gaps, all within the unique socioeconomic educational context of a semi-remote mining community. Despite providing really comprehensive access to lesson content online at the beginning of each class or at the summary of a week's lessons, I would sort of post everything online. I'd also begin classes with really clear learning intentions and recaps. Attendance inconsistencies led to many of my students really still struggling to stay engaged. Often students who missed classes due to work placements or other reasons would return with limited recall or understanding of previous lessons, feeling disconnected from the current learning. In Australia's assessment-oriented educational framework, students can theoretically achieve a passing grade through a final assessments alone, even if they miss a significant portion of instruction, provided the assessment aligns with their zone of proximal development, as Vygotsky notes, and is curriculum relevant, is appropriately challenging for their year level, and for it to meet up with like SCARSA requirements, and probably for them to succeed, they would require a degree of scaffolding, things like a revision sheet or a assessment that's framed around the idea of utilizing their critical skills, providing them with a passage of text to read rather than expecting them to have read an entire book, which is what I will engage with going forward. So all of this is to say, like, recognizing the importance of consistent classroom hours and content mastery. I am fully aware of the importance of students staying in school and spending as many hours in school, and that having a really beneficial effect on many statistics later on in life. But the reality is within the unique socioeconomic context of where we are at, I wanted to see if I could come up with a strategy that could support students achieving success despite gaps in attendance. And this is the developmental rubrics was what I found I was interested in exploring. For context, Cambalda West is a semi-remote mining town, where, as Gunther and Bat in 2013 highlighted, mining economies often prioritize employment over education. According to research by Bishop in 2019, the mining boom substantially raised the opportunity cost for continuing formal education as high-paying jobs became accessible without any tertiary qualifications. Between 2001 and 2012, this economic shift resulted in a decline in tertiary participation rates, especially in mining regions like Western Australia and Queensland, where the mining sector GDP contributions rose from 2% to 9% over a decade. And I imagine that for areas like this one, the GDP is probably predominantly from the mining sector. This socioeconomic dynamic shapes students' aspirations as mining jobs appear more achievable and financially rewarding than tertiary education. Consequently, students' engagement and attendance levels at Cambalda West District High School reflect these broader economic factors. According to ACARA data from 2020 and 2024, about 65% of our students come from households within the lowest quartile on the index of community socio-educational advantage, highlighting limited socio-educational support for them at home and for the school. The average attendance rate in my Year 12 class over the last 3 years has been around 65%, though individual attendance varies considerably. And for some students, particularly those with regular work placements, attendance can be as low as 35%, with many regarding TAFE or work placement days as primary components of their education. This attitude is further reinforced by family and community perspectives, where educational attainment is viewed as secondary to employment in the mines. I do want to go into this a little bit more detail though. Here are some statistics. Oh, I've got a note here about what to put in here, but yeah, the average attendance, 65, and 67% of students in the lower ICSEA quartile. I have a notation here on our attendance. If you can't see the full graph, it says attendance, what can we kind of learn from the data? This is a screenshot from our compass system, and it will have clarifying sections on the kind of individual percentages. So in-class attendance, accounted for attendance, and whole school attendance. And I think what's really interesting there is the averages. When I kind of put all those individual attendance levels together, it says about 49.5%. This is this year, percent of students are in class. So 50.5% of the time students are out of class. But looking at that 50.5% of out of class time, very little of it is unaccounted for. So 93.89% of the total non-attendance in the class is accounted for. Things like work placement, alternative pathways, all sorts of things like that, even illness. Parents saying, we're going on a long holiday to Bali. These are all things that we'll say, we know why they're away. And some of it is treated as in-school time and won't affect our overall school attendance. All right, so the project goals, the intervention aimed to develop student self-assessment skills and engagement through developmental rubrics, explicit teaching, and collaborative learning activities. The three assessments that I end up looking at are a diagnostic test, a final assessment, autobiographical writing task, and an essay. These assessments provide structured opportunity for reflection, skill development, and critical engagement. This is an example of a previous developmental rubric. I call it a diagnostic checklist here for an assessment we did before the impact proposal, where I was already, excuse me, so sorry, where we were already looking at the developmental rubric structure, but it's still using a hierarchical idea. So I have here a checklist, and the coloring system allows them to know where they're succeeding. And then I have my sort of grade, and I don't do half points. So this student had a lot of parts of their exemplary component. They achieved most of the things I asked them to achieve, but they didn't achieve all of them, and they got quite a few from proficient. So overall, they ended up getting 8 out of 10. So they got challenged. They also, what's important is even though the grade might have been lower than they wanted, they know exactly what they need to do to get a higher grade, because those checklist boxes are not ticked off, and they could be in the future assessments or future work they do. Why developmental rubrics? I believe that they are really effective explicit teaching tools. I like that they map student progression through the stages of mastery over a skill or knowledge area. Unlike traditional rubrics, developmental rubrics emphasize skill building over fixed performance levels. What I don't like about hierarchical rubrics is they are of evaluative nature rather than developmental. So they focus on where a student performance falls within a set range, which can be really subjective or really like held within a very particular political prism or value set at a time. So it could be, you know, a really effective grammar, and it might discount other skills that a student is succeeding at. And I think also what's really helped me using developmental rubrics is really clarifying what I'm trying to teach. And I think that's kind of come across into effective teaching as well. The theoretical frameworks that I'm looking at is Bandura's self-efficacy theory, the idea that students who believe they can succeed are more likely to persist with challenging tasks. The idea of using a developmental rubric here is just to clarify what they're being asked to achieve, and to therefore illuminate the pathway to them achieving it. Zimmerman self-regulation from 2008, this self-regulation kind of idea, it's all about students self-monitoring their progress and adjusting their efforts, really focused on goal setting And that's really where having a really clear checklist or a really clear idea about what the actual expectation is and the number of skills required to get up to that stage, this idea of developmental, is really helpful. I'm not expected to be an expert overnight. It's recognizing that it takes time. It's a staircase. Deci and Ryan self-determination theory from 2000 emphasizes autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Oh, let's go back. I'm going to go back to my transcript because I've been a bit off of it for a little while. I just wanted to cover that the kind of big data that I collected, or the data I tried to collect, was class assessments, or sorry, class survey at the beginning and the end of this project. I have a pre-diagnostic test that I then did feedback with my students and did a summative assessment that mirrored that test. And then I have 2 other assessments that students did, which is an autobiographical writing task and an essay. And I've used developmental rubrics throughout in different ways. We don't really have enough time to cover it, but I've tried to write in my notations different processes that occurred. And it's really interesting. There's a lot of cross-pollination in how this is working, and I think there's more to explore here than I can today. Yeah, so we're kind of trying to balance like explicit instruction with independent learning strategies that support self-efficacy and ownership. And as I proceed, I will discuss the design of the intervention and share data I collected and reflect on some successes and challenges I encountered. And I will contextualize these findings within self-regulation and self-efficacy frameworks, drawing on theoretical perspectives from Bandura, Zimmerman, and Deci and Ryan. Yeah, okay. Going back to my slideshow, a bit of a win. Engagement rate for, I had, in some of my assessments, I had increased engagement. And a challenge was I realized that while the developmental rubrics were really good, they were most effective when I was the person guiding them through it. I'm going to explore that a little bit later on. This is the survey that I did. Some of the questions were, there was about 37 self-reflective questions, and I just took 5 of them for analysis here. Question 3 was, I am so nervous during tests that I cannot remember the facts that I've learned, the idea of just brain blank. And my students said, yeah, that felt really valid for them. Also, I have an uneasy and upset feeling around tests. It makes them feel anxious. Had a lot of students say that was the maximum. They really didn't like it. It made them feel really out-of-bodied. Even when I do poorly in tests, I try to learn from my mistakes. This one is the most important to me as a teacher, and it was sort of a bit of a mix. When I work hard, when work is hard, I either give up or I study only the easy parts. Yeah, quite a few students said that feels real for them, so an average of 6.2. And I think I will receive a good grade in this class, average 3.6, which made me feel really bad. They were really nervous. There was very little written feedback, only 2 pieces, and both of those were, I put them here. What incarnation is this about? And class isn't that interesting. I don't understand anything, lol, smiley face. I don't know if they were being sarcastic or if that's really how they feel. Looking at the NAPLAN data, student performance from NAPLAN and OLNA really highlights the need for an intervention. Only 48% of my students in that Year 12 class have met their Year 9 reading standard, and 35% have not yet, or had not at the time that I was looking at that data, achieved OLNA. We've now reached the end of the year, and fortunately only 1 student out of the entire class hasn't done OLNA. Basically, there's 1 student who's left to complete OLNA, and they're going to go on a pathway to do that. So that's good news, but yeah, the students, really struggling in certain places, particularly literacy. Average attendance, as I mentioned earlier, and in my pre-diagnostic test, which I'm going to go into now, showed around 35% of students need improvement in higher order thinking skills. This is the diagnostic test. It follows a Bloom's taxonomy. So question 1 is about remembering. Question 2 is about understanding. Question 3 is about applying your understanding and the things you remember. Question 4 is about analyzing. Question 5 is about evaluating your information. And question 6 is about creating. I provided a passage of a similarly challenging text to the final assessment, which would be on 1984. From To Kill a Mockingbird, it's Atticus Finch's closing argument. I've asked students to analyze rhetoric devices throughout it, and the more challenging part is evaluating the impact and effects of different rhetorical devices. I asked them in their final assessment to do something similar with themes from 1984. What I found really interesting is students were really engaged with the remembering, understanding, applying stages, about 50% cut off. So basically they got to analyzing and went, I find this really hard. Evaluating, I had a huge drop off, and basically actually 0 students completed the creating. That may have been me saying this is just a diagnostic, give it your best shot, because they were so intimidated by the length of the test that I ended up making decisions later on to change the final test assessment to remove the creating element from it. So the test would end at around question 5 or stage 5. And for their creating, they would be doing their autobiographical writing and an essay. Not so much to express just creative skills, but also the idea of creating from information and learning that you've done is the purpose of that hierarchy, or the higher order thinking stages, is to sort of build off the knowledge you had before. The data from this, this is the rubric that they used for that assessment. I have some examples of direct feedback that I provided students. This would have been from our one-on-one afterwards. As you can see, this student in the pink, that these are the colors they've chosen. They've done the coloring in. For the pink, that's skills that they definitely demonstrated. And I'm like, well done, nailed it. These are the stages that they just were like, they tried these, they didn't achieve them. And these last 2, they didn't even try. And they have this kind of darker color here, which they said, I know I could have shown you that, and I just didn't read the question properly. So from this diagnostic test, we learned a lot about how to approach the final assessment, but also we learned specifically what skills we already know how to do, and that built a lot of confidence in my students. Even though this student got a really low score, they understood how to approach what's going forward, and it made the learning that we did throughout the unit a lot more relevant. This is a comparison of their grades from the diagnostic test as compared to their 1984 test. This one, they look exactly the same. This is the diagnostic and this is the 1984 test. As you can see with the colors that I've sort of tried to create, I've said with the yellow, their scores have remained the same. If it's green, it means their scores have gone up from the diagnostic. And if it's red, it means that they've kind of been below the diagnostic or they didn't participate. And as you can see, the majority of people who did the 1984 test after the diagnostic test, their grades actually went up, with the exception to a few students. So it's really exciting. There's a couple of standout students in particular that I think are really interesting to look at. So TK, these are all anonymized. TK significantly improved from 9 out of 20 to 19 out of 23, demonstrating the impact of targeted feedback and support. This is that student right here. This was that student. AF improved from 10 out of 20 to 13 out of 23 through interactive feedback, but the gains were moderate. That student also has very low attendance in class. It's a pity I didn't clarify the in-class attendance component in that graph, but maybe I'll put it in my notes. CR and AT, these students struggled with attendance, in-class attendance, leading to no meaningful improvement. Both ended with a 0 out of 23 for their final assessment, despite showing some initial engagement. So they didn't complete their final test. We did have 70% increased engagement, but these students were not part of that. For the next, so this is a side-by-side also of effort and engagement. So a student called Shah, the diagnostic test in the evaluation section, which I can show here. Oh, sorry. Please wait. Oh my goodness, sorry. So this is the evaluation section. You can see here that TK also didn't complete it. A lot of students didn't complete it. The markings that I've done on the one on the slide show that, like, these are sort of marks from a discussion I was having. I was sort of running that student through, okay, this is what you read first, and then this is the keywords that you're looking for, and then this is how you approach it. And you can see that there's an example that I provided up here. So you just read through all those stages before you get overwhelmed, and then you can proceed forward. And we can then see that on their next attempt, this is, oh, sorry. In that next attempt, Shah has actually tried to do that stage and gave it a really good go. And you could see that they had read through the information and the example provided to them. And this is TK's, and he's done the same. So he left it blank, and then you can see that he's actually attempted it on our final assessment. So that's really good, but perhaps more of an indicator of, yes, the developmental rubric is a really effective self-assessment tool, but it's also been a really effective tool for me as a teacher to give side-by-side one-on-one feedback, and give a little bit more of a visual clarity, where, like, after a discussion that we've had, they can go and have a look at what we discussed, and they'll see some of my feedback notes, and they'll also have this, and they have colored that in themselves. So they have a bit of a visual memory there, which is pretty cool. Okay. This also up here, the learning from your mistakes, is a poster I have in my room. It's really big. Is that this autobiographical writing? This is an example of the very, very long and comprehensive developmental rubric I had for that. It was a lot and probably too long, but students did go through it, and they went on one by one. They did computerized versions of this and in-person versions of this, but currently they're in a school archive, so I can't access them right now. But it'll come out something like this. It'll look like a colored version. They did hand coloring versions of this, which is really good. You can see that using that rubric method that we have below, above, and at standard, the majority are somewhat below standard. This was their kind of final assessment. Essays are really hard for my students, but they actually did quite well. I'm really proud of them. That we had a really high level of participation, which is really good. And the whole class grade so that's the autobiographical writing, whole class grade for the essay. Same thing. Sorry, I got those two confused. You can see the essay has a really clear set of expectations and skills, and it very much mirrors the feedback strategy as I keep showing up here. Diagnostic and summative results. The diagnostic test revealed gaps in critical thinking, as we said. And then we're moving to the summative assessment. One student improved from 9 out of 20 to 19 out of 23. Yeah, and the attendance stuff correlates pretty closely with performance. So I'm not sure if the developmental rubric process really addressed that problem. The autobiographical writing task, where we did see some at standard, below standard, but higher participation. We had 70% of students actually participated in that task, which is a really, really big deal. That's a big deal. This is their, it's a bit foggy there, but this is a table I created looking at their whole unit as aligned to the curriculum, and looking at that as a developmental rubric, or creating a developmental rubric for me as a teacher for each of the skills that they need to be working on. And this is still in the works, but this is sort of where I'm moving forward with this idea. I think the language needs to be simpler. But it's a really, I think, just trying to make teaching as explicit and lowering the cognitive load for teachers and students is really important. This is how I use that. So overall 2024 skills acquired for remembering skills. It's related to the curriculum. I said understand how content, structure, voice, and perspective in a text shapes responses and interpretations in really simple language. It identifies, main characters, recalls significant events in detail. And I can I've got that list over there under the checklist: identifies main characters and their roles, recalls significant events and details, lists basic narrative structure. Those are the things I really want them to be able to do. And I will tick that off. I think in the future, I won't have the points. I will just have the skills that they need to tick off, not thinking about it so hierarchically. I'm gonna move this. Something that I realized is only around 20% of students use the rubrics independently. 70% found them helpful. Like, this is an anecdotal survey, but like 70% of students also found them really helpful in post-assessment feedback, peer assessments, validated rubric criteria with students assigned grades, aligning pretty close to my evaluations. Personalized feedback sessions using the rubrics, the one-on-one, that was really where I think the biggest outcome from this was. I've got quite a lot of data left in my notes that I haven't been able to cover because I really don't want to I'm rambling. Okay. I'm just going to talk a little self-assessment here. The developmental rubrics were available at the beginning of the project, but only, not as many students use them independently. This does align with research from Zimmerman and Schunk from 2011, which highlights that metacognitive tools require ongoing practice and scaffolding to become student-led resources. However, the post-assessment feedback sessions revealed the full potential of them. In structured one-on-one meetings, we use the rubrics to visually highlight progress through ticking off and completing areas or coloring in sections that required further work. And this really helped to clarify where students were excelling and where gaps remained, boosting their confidence. During the intervention, I integrated peer assessments to encourage collaborative reflection. It was surprisingly successful. I didn't think that would be as cool as it was. Gamifying the rubrics, although students were slightly more lenient with their grading, the alignments with my evaluations were definitely like in the same sort of curvature. They were kinder, but it definitely mirrored the same scales as I had, which reinforced the credibility of the rubrics as a guiding or assessment framework. This reflects Falchikov's 1995 work. He argued that peer assessment enhances understanding by encouraging students to view their work through an evaluative lens as well as a sort of staged skill-based lens. Let's just look at that kind of main success point. Ultimately, the rubrics became the most impactful as tools for direct teacher-student feedback sessions with small class size. I had the privilege of sitting down with each student individually, working through their assessments using the rubric, and this personal engagement allowed us to co-create realistic goals and monitor progress in a meaningful way. Vygotsky's 1978 theory of zones of proximal development underscores the importance of this type of guided feedback in helping students reach their potential by understanding where they're actually at. Conclusions for further direction or future directions, reflecting on kind of explicit teaching and student-led work. The honest conclusion of this project is that both explicit teaching and student-led approaches are really effective, though not always in the sequence I originally planned. While I intended for the developmental rubrics to serve as a guiding tool throughout, students often relied more on my instructional guidance and the clarity of assessment outlines. In practice, approximately 60% of the class worked from my teacher's statements and verbal instructions, then independently using rubrics, and then they might use that as like a kind of backup, despite statements repeated to encourage their usage. The most impactful component for the 1984 test was definitely the pre-diagnostic assessment, using To Kill a Mockingbird as a model for the final task, and the way that was modeled to use the Bloom's taxonomy. This assessment alongside one-on-one feedback sessions help students to set really clear goals, recognizing their existing strengths and identifying critical areas for improvement. The developmental rubrics contributed meaningfully to this process by creating a visual measure and tracking progress, but ultimately I functioned more as a facilitator, and although I encouraged students to engage with the rubrics independently, few did so without direct prompting. Interestingly, the developmental rubrics proved to be the most effective post-assessment feedback tool. During follow-up sessions, students expressed greater trust in their grades, with the survey responses highlighting that the rubrics' transparency increased their confidence in the fairness of their assessments. We even conducted peer evaluations, and while student markers were slightly more lenient than me, the outcomes were pretty close. In the future, I plan to continue using developmental rubrics to foster independent learning. Oh wait, I'm just going to quickly go through these guys. We said I have an uneasy feeling when I take a test. You can see. Oh, is that the change? Yes. So we haven't got new data, we just have data added to. And so the averages have really changed to from a score of 8.8 to 5.8. So a 3-point reduction in the upset feeling. I'm so nervous during a test that I can't remember any facts that I learned. We changed from a score of 8 to 6.4, so a 1.6 point reduction in forgetting facts during a test due to nervousness. I think I received good grades in this class. Score of 3.6, low confidence, changed to 5, so a 1.4 point increase in the belief of good grades, which is not as much as I would like it to be. I want them to have more confidence, but it is something. And even when I do poorly in a test, I try to learn from my mistakes. A score of 5 changed to 7, 2-point increase. And I am super stoked on that. That is important. And the last one is when work is hard, I either give up or I only study the easy parts. A score of 6.2 changed to 4, a 2.2 point reduction in the idea of like giving up when it's hard. And here's some of the feedback that I got given. I like the rubrics because I asked them specifically about the rubrics. I like the rubrics because they showed me the difference in my grade. I need the teacher to help me go through them. Although my favorite was the theme study and the comparison, comparing 1984 to the Dead Poets Thanksmith. That was really fun. I liked the practice test and the feedback because it allowed me to know what to focus on. It was hard to answer the survey questions, though. I don't think about it that deep. And the one-on-one sessions definitely helped. Thank you. So I think that kind of backs up what I was saying a lot. In the future, I'll keep using developmental rubrics. I'll keep working on them. I'll incorporate more peer-led discussions to deeper student engagement. I think gamifying would be important. I'll explore additional interventions to address attendance issues and foster stronger connection between education and career aspirations. Try to make that relevancy thing get a little bit stronger, and I'll consider the possibility of posting online lectures for my students who are regularly away from class, and doing kind of similar things where I'm working through the rubric, which would really prepare them for uni. That'd be great. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.